The story, can I tell you guys, my name Val always told the story. And this has to do with the big house that's in the forest here. And the story takes place on the south end of, it's called Aristobal Island. Used to be a village in there. And the village was called Witiam. And so one day these 4 hunters that decided to go out on a seal hunt. And they wanted to paddle from the south end all the way up to the north end of the island. It's a pretty big island, and after they started out hunting, over a week's time, they had a very successful hunt. And about a week later, they're at the northern end of the island, and all the men were kind of tired, and they didn't even bother to pull into the bay. They just decided to drop anchor. So they dropped anchor, and it was getting dark. All the men in the boat decided to go to sleep. And so only one of the guys couldn't go to sleep because he kept hearing a noise. And it was kind of like a slapping noise he kept hearing on the side of the canoe. So he got up, he took a look, and then there wasn't anything there. So he tried to lie back down and go back to sleep again. And he heard the noise again, the slapping noise. Jumped up, looked over the edge, and he didn't see anything. He just kind of get a little bit upset. So the third time, he was actually kind of waiting there. He was waiting to hear the noise, and then when he heard the noise, he jumped up. It was a ratfish. He pulled it out of the water. And as upset as he was, he grabbed its fins and he ripped it off, and he threw it back into the water. And he actually managed to fall back asleep. And this ratfish, when it got thrown into the water, it managed to swim underwater, dove under, and managed to get into this underwater bakehouse. As he walked through the door, he transformed from a ratfish into a human. So here was this human with no arms, and he walked up to the master, the chief of the big house, and his name was Gitnuganox. And Gitnuganox said, "What happened? What had happened to you?" And then the ratfish said, "Well, look what they had done to me. They had torn off my arms. They tore off my arms." So Gitnuganox, the chief of the big house, was really upset. So he left the underwater big house and went up and grabbed their canoe and pulled them under. They dragged the men underwater, formed this big whirlpool, and the men woke up and they're in this underwater big house, and described the big house as as starfish and sea anemones for the ceiling, giant halibut for a floor, grizzly bears, holding up the big house, and Gitnuganox was sitting there. So the men were still sitting in their canoe yet, and Gitnuganox said, "What have you done to my slave?" And one of the men spoke up and trying to apologize to Gitnuganox for the loss of his slaves. Gitnuganox said, "Well, how are you going to compensate me for the loss of my slave?" And one of the men spoke up and said, "We can give you all our seal meat and all our seal fat that we got from our hunt." And Gitnuganox agreed, and he took all their seal meat and said, "Well, I'm going to take all your seal meat, but you guys have to stay here in Potlatch for 4 days and 4 nights." Men had no choice but to agree, and Gitnuganox started inviting all the winds. He invited the north wind, he invited the easterly wind, he invited the westerly wind. Each and every one of them brought a form of a gift or a form of punishment. Gitnuganox was he also invited the chief of Skeena River, chief of Nass. He invited all these people from these neighboring communities to come in Potlatch. And when the easterly wind came in, he had a black face and a black cloak on. Walked up to the canoe, and he kicked over the canoe, and all the men fell out of the canoe. And the easterly wind said that if I see you out in the water, I'm going to come kick your canoe over. The north wind came up to the men, and he had like a icicle kind of beard, and he had a white cloak on. And he came over and he touched the ground around the canoe and started freezing all around the canoe. And said, "If I see you out in the water, I'm going to freeze the water around you." Kind of like a form of punishment from what he'd done to the ratfish. Only the wind that kind of brought a gift was the westerly wind. It's kind of a nice warm wind that we're kind of getting right now. It's nice and warm, nice weather. And he gave the men a big drum, and the men received the drum and he said, "If you hit it, and if you're in my area here, south of Kitasoo Bay, that if you hear my drum beat, and that's me." So apparently, when you get a good westerly wind in the Kitasoo Bay, it sounds like a drum beat. Anyways, they stayed in Potlatch, danced, And after 4 days and 4 nights, it's kind of finally coming to an end. And all the men were asking, Gitnuganoks, can we go now? Can we go now? We've been here, we've potlatched with you for 4 days and 4 nights. And Gitnugan was kind of irritated and kind of upset. And he said, go, and he kicked open the door of the big house and started flooding under the water. All the men jumped back in their canoes and they managed to resurface, left the underwater big house and resurfaced, and they drained out their canoe. They jumped back into their canoe, not knowing they're filled with barnacles and sea growth. And the men just started paddling, wanted to get home. And they tried to paddle back home at Witiam Bay, and it got foggy and they couldn't see where they're going, so they're paddling and paddling hours and hours and hours, and they finally hit an island. And the men in the back of the canoe told the man in the front of the canoe, go climb the biggest spruce tree you can find and find out where we are. So one of the men climbed up and he was looking around and he seen some mountains and he said, well, we've gone the wrong way because those are the mountains of Haida Gwaii. So the men decided to get back into the canoes, left, and they were coming back across, and the fog kind of cleared up and the men could see their village, you could see the smoke coming from the bay. And they paddled straight for Witiam and they managed to get home. And as they arrived on the shoreline, the community members were really shocked to see that they were there, and the men didn't care. They just wanted to go home and tell their wives what had happened. As they walked up to their homes, all the 4 men, they realized that all their wives had been married off to other men, and the men couldn't understand what was going on. So the men had no reason to be living there in Witiam Bay, but they told the story that where they were in this underwater big house and what had happened to them, and they got pulled underwater, and what they had seen, and they described the big house they were at, described the type of gifts that they received and the punishments that they received from doing that to the ratfish. And because they told their story, all the men got chief names. But the men decided to leave Witiam Bay and they came across this way. And they came here and they built a replica of what they had seen underwater. I can go back to the story where when the men first anchored and they dropped anchor, and that anchor hit the top of the big house and made a big bang, and Gitnuganok sent up his slave to go up and see what that noise was. And the ratfish was asking the canoe to move because they dropped anchor on top of their house. And because the men had ripped off the fins off the ratfish and threw them back into the water, it turned out that the 4 days turned out to be 4 years that they're actually underwater for. And the type of story Manani Vala has always told me is the moral is about respect and respecting animals and respecting yourself and respecting others, that you do this and this will happen to you. My grandmother used to tell me this story all the time as I was growing up, and she made sure that she kind of drilled it into my head that you have to respect animals and you have to respect yourself. Never get more than you need for salmon and more than you need for hunting and stuff like that. So moral of that is about respect and sustaining the things that are around you. And marine use planning and everything like that. If you look at our values, number 1 on that list is conservation. Number 2 is food fish. Number 3 is economics. We'd rather protect the salmon and protect the bears before we even just talk about money, before we even talk about food fish. We'd rather have them protected and respect them. Some of the elders in Klamtu says, it's that common theme of the circle of life. Take one out, you affect everything else. Take salmon out, you affect the bears, you affect us. So we're exactly a part of that ecosystem around here. So we're competing with the other animals as well, but we're people and we'll respect that, and we'll take our share and leave the others for the animals.